quietly removed from her flight for looking suspicious. So she quietly removed $4 billion from their future. Some mornings just click. The coffee's perfect. The roads are clear. TSA actually acts human. That's the kind of morning Dr. Monique Ellison was having, until things changed. It was 6:43 a.m. in Terminal A of Salt Lake City International. The kind of morning that whispers, "Today is yours." Monique was sharp in a navy pantsuit, her stride confident but composed, a slim carry-on trailing behind her like a loyal shadow. Her assistant had already texted the Geneva agenda. The car had arrived at exactly 5:10, not a minute late. Even the barista had remembered her name, not Dr. Ellison, just Monique. Personal, familiar, like she belonged everywhere, and she did. This wasn't just another work trip. This was the trip, the one where her company, Vidian Systems, was finalizing a $4 billion partnership with a major international airline group, a deal 2 years in the making. She had led the entire process herself, from the first video call to the final compliance review. She wasn't handed this life, no last name privilege, no silent investors in the family. Her journey started at a community college, then Stanford, then late nights writing code, fixing servers, running board meetings with more competence than most CEOs twice her age. Now she was heading to Switzerland to sign the deal. First class, director, seat 2A. She'd earned every inch of it. She reached the gate early. She always did. The terminal was unusually still. Even the sun seemed cooperative, casting a soft orange glow over the runway through tall, spotless windows. Flight attendants chatted casually in the corner. No announcements yet. Monique sat down near the window, opened her iPad, and checked the numbers. Revenue trends were strong. Downtime minimal. Stakeholders would be thrilled. She allowed herself a breath. That's when it happened. "Excuse me, ma'am." She looked up. 2 men stood in front of her. Airport security. One older, heavy-set, arms folded in the kind of way that says, "Don't ask questions." The other younger, wiry, wearing mirrored sunglasses, indoors. "Yes?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. "We need you to come with us." She paused, unsure she heard correctly. "Why?" "This won't take long," the older one replied. No ID, no badge, no name, no context, just a voice that wasn't asking. It was expecting obedience. Monique looked down at her boarding pass. Flight 51, seat 2A, nothing unusual, nothing off. She stood anyway, slowly. "I'm the CEO of Vidian Systems. I'm flying to Geneva for a business signing. I believe you have the wrong person." But they didn't stop. The older man motioned toward a narrow hallway near the gate. "No mistake, ma'am, just routine." People were watching now. A college student in sweatpants, a couple near the window, one of the flight attendants, her smile gone, gaze locked, the kind of silence that follows discomfort. Monique's chest tightened, but she walked, not because she felt safe, but because she understood the stakes. The hallway was dim, with flickering fluorescent lights and scuffed linoleum floors. It didn't feel like a place passengers were supposed to be. She stopped walking. "Can someone please explain what this is about?" The younger guard leaned against the wall, arms crossed, silent. The older one finally cleared his throat. "There was a tip. A passenger matching your description was behaving suspiciously. We had to follow up." Monique's eyes narrowed. "Suspicious? How?" "No details," the guard said with a shrug. "Just came through the airline's internal channel. We're required to investigate." She folded her arms. "So a vague anonymous tip with zero evidence, and I get pulled out of line and led down a hallway like I'm hiding something? No answer." She looked around. "Am I being detained?" Still nothing. She reached for her phone. "Ma'am, we'll need you to put that away. I'm contacting legal counsel. You're stopping me before an international flight without giving me any reason. You really think I won't document this?" The younger guard shifted slightly. Too late. She hit send. The first message to her attorney, the second to her assistant, the third, a quiet photo of the hallway. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't curse. She didn't threaten. She documented. And when the story went public 3 days later, the headline didn't read CEO pulled aside. It read, Tech exec removed from flight after suspicious tip, the $4 billion fallout. Because the company she was flying to sign with, she walked away from that deal, and with her went the future they were counting on. She wasn't loud. She didn't make a scene. She just watched the doors close on a plane she was supposed to be on, then made a decision that would cost the airline $4 billion. Ma'am, we're just trying to keep people safe. Monique turned to face the guard squarely, eyes steady. Are you keeping people safe, or just reacting to a phone call from someone who couldn't handle seeing a black woman in first class? The silence that followed felt thick enough to break. No one answered. For the next 15 minutes, the same questions repeated in circles. Where are you traveling? What's the reason for your trip? Any checked bags? Who do you work for? Each time Monique answered clearly, professionally, without wavering. Geneva, business, no checked luggage, Vidian Systems. I'm the CEO. But every answer was followed by the same pause, like they were waiting for her to say something, anything, that didn't match, just to give them an excuse. The younger guard scribbled notes, never looking her in the eyes. The older one looked like he regretted being involved at all. At one point he muttered, "Could be a false alarm." Monique looked at him sharply. "Then let me go. My flight's boarding." He sighed. "We'll clear it up soon." But by the time they finally walked her back toward the gate, the screen above had already changed. Final boarding. Gate closed. Flight 517 was gone. She stood by the window, frozen, watching the plane roll back from the terminal. The same plane she was supposed to be on, the same seat reserved in her name, the same meeting she'd spent years preparing for. Her hands were cold, not from fear, but from disbelief. "I'd like a written explanation," she said, her voice flat, but controlled. "Why I was removed, why I missed that flight." The older guard scratched the back of his neck. "Ma'am, we don't usually do that unless there's an incident report, and technically, I want names, yours, his, and the person who filed the report." The younger guard tensed. "That's confidential, ma'am." She nodded slowly, biting the inside of her cheek. "So, you can pull me from a flight based on nothing, hold me for nearly an hour, cost me a seat worth 5 figures, and then just walk away?" "You're free to rebook," the younger one said. "The airline may cover part of the cost." She didn't respond, just picked up her carry-on, phone still in hand, and walked away. No one tried to stop her, but she could feel the eyes on her, those same silent passengers from before, watching, still saying nothing. What none of them knew, not the guards, not the airline staff, not even the bystanders, was who Monique really was, and what she was about to do next. She sat at a small cafe just past security, not for coffee, but for air, for silence, for a second to breathe. She hovered her fingers over her phone. She wasn't sure whether to call her chief legal officer or the chairman of the board. Instead, she called Taylor. Her assistant picked up on the second ring. "You land early," or "I didn't get on the plane." Pause. "What? Why? What happened?" Monique's voice lowered. "Security pulled me aside, said someone reported me as suspicious. Never said who, never said why. Questioned me for 45 minutes. I missed the flight." Taylor was silent. I'm sorry. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Monique replied. But she wasn't. Her shoulders ached from tension. Her heart hadn't slowed since the moment those men said, "Step over here. Do you want me to alert the Swiss team? Delay the signing?" "Not yet," Monique said. "I need to make some decisions first." After they hung up, she sat for a while, watching the foam swirl in the untouched cappuccino in front of her. All she could think about were the faces, the silent witnesses, the flight attendant who looked away, the student who didn't speak, the couple who just kept scrolling. Not one person asked a question, not one person stood up. She opened her iPad, not to check email, but to open Vidian's secure project drive. One file sat at the top, Project Atlas, the code name for the partnership, AI architecture, cloud tools, a 10-year deal, $4 billion. She stared at the screen and imagined walking into Monday's meeting and saying one word. "Pull it." She closed the iPad, Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. She let it ring. Then it rang again. She answered. "This is Dr. Ellison." The voice was crisp, corporate, male, mid-40s. "This is Alan Rusk. I'm one of the directors at Northern Air, the same airline that had just cost her that seat, the same company that had spent the last 8 months negotiating with her team. We were informed of the incident this morning. I just wanted to personally assure you that we're reviewing it carefully." She said nothing. "Our preliminary report indicates it was based on a passenger tip. No profiling was intended. It was simply a precaution." "A precaution," Monique repeated, voice neutral. "Yes, and again, we regret the inconvenience." She could hear the hesitation in his voice. This was not a man used to being questioned. "Inconvenience?" she said, her voice low, steady, and razor-sharp. "Mr. Rusk, you think this was about inconvenience?" "Dr. Ellison, we understand how upsetting this must have been." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "I was pulled from a gate like a threat. No explanation, no apology, and I missed an international meeting because your team wanted to play it safe." On the other end of the call, Alan Rusk, the Northern Air executive, paused. "I understand your frustration," he said, though his tone made it clear he didn't. "We're committed to making this right. If there's anything we can do—" "There is," Monique interrupted. Her voice was steady. "Be ready for a formal notice from Vidian Systems." Excuse me," he asked, but she was already walking. "Next time your security team decides a black woman in a business suit is suspicious, maybe find out who she is before you take her off a plane." What Alan didn't know, and what Monique herself was only starting to understand, was that this wasn't going to stay private. This wasn't a quiet memo or a polite apology behind closed doors. This was about to get public, loud, and very, very expensive. Monique didn't cry. She didn't yell. She didn't even tell her driver what had happened. She sat in the back of the black SUV in silence as the car pulled away from Salt Lake City International. Her arms folded, eyes fixed on the blur of traffic, her mind replaying every moment like a tape on a loop. She wasn't embarrassed. She was angry. The kind of anger that didn't explode. It built. By the time she arrived at her condo in Scottsdale that evening, the desert sun was low, casting deep gold shadows across her living room floor. She dropped her bag at the door, stepped out of her shoes, and walked to the kitchen, without turning on a single light. Her phone buzzed. A message from Taylor. "Let me know if you want help drafting something for the executive team, or just want to talk. I'm here." Another ping. This one from Leandra Cho, Vidian's general counsel. "I heard. I'm furious. Whatever you want to do, I'm backing you. Say the word." Monique stared at the screen for a moment, then set her phone down, opened the fridge, poured a glass of water. The silence in her home felt louder than the airport hallway. She thought about how easy it would be to do what others do. Say nothing. Keep the peace. Protect the deal. Let it go for the sake of the business. But she couldn't shake the image of the younger guard's face, that blank look, the one that said, "You don't belong here. Not in first class. Not in this partnership." She picked up her phone again. Her thumb hovered. Then she typed, "Leandra, can we gather the board for an emergency session? I want to speak before Monday, and I want this documented. Every word, every action." She hit send, walked into her home office, sat at her desk. Her laptop hummed as it powered on. She opened a blank document and typed the subject line, "Northern Air Incident, Personal Statement from Dr. Monique Ellison." Her fingers hovered above the keyboard. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about the next woman who'd get pulled aside because someone felt uneasy. About every moment someone in a suit is asked to explain why they look out of place. She began typing, slowly at first, then faster. "I'm not writing this as a CEO. I'm writing this as a black woman who built everything she has from nothing and was treated like nothing anyway." She didn't stop, not until the truth was on the page. Monday, 9:02 a.m. Vidian Systems headquarters, 3rd floor, East Conference Room. 12 board members sat around a long glass table. Some joined via satellite from Europe and Asia. Touchscreen panels flickered. Frosted glass walls turned opaque at a tap. No one paid attention to the design. All eyes were on Monique. She stood at the head of the room. No notes, no slideshow, just her. She cleared her throat. "I'll be direct," she began. "On Friday, I was removed from my flight based on an anonymous report. No accusation, no crime, just a feeling. I cooperated, answered every question, and still, I missed our Geneva signing." Murmurs rippled around the room. Jerome Park, head of the audit committee, leaned forward. "Did they give you a reason?" "They never had one," she said. "I wasn't searched. I wasn't accused. I was just stopped because I didn't look like someone who belongs in seat 2A. Silence, heavy. Leandra slid a folder toward the center of the table. "They've released a public statement. It's vague. No mention of race, no apology, just regret, and a promise to review procedures." "Corporate whitewash," Monique said. "Well said," added Julia Lin, head of international strategy. "Then what are you proposing?" Monique didn't blink. "We terminate the agreement. Entirely." Vidian pulls out of Project Atlas. Someone at the end of the table whispered, "That's $4 billion. And Monique answered, loud and clear, "Exactly." Monique stepped closer to the boardroom table, her voice low but unwavering. "You think I don't know what this means? I built this company from the ground up. I remember when landing a $50,000 contract felt like a win." She let that memory settle before continuing. "But if we move forward with this partnership, after what happened, what message are we sending? To our team, to every employee who's ever been profiled at an airport, followed in a store, sat through another mandatory diversity training that changed nothing." She paused again, letting silence work for her, not against her. "This isn't about revenge," she said. "It's about respect. And I refuse to shake hands with a company that treats people like me as threats first and professionals second." Her eyes swept the room. "I'm not asking you to agree with me. I'm asking you to stand with me." The room was still. For a moment, all you could hear was the soft buzz of the frosted glass panels. Then Jerome Park, veteran board member, known for keeping emotion out of business, leaned forward, arms folded. "I've been on this board for 8 years. I've never seen you walk in here and ask for anything like this. So I'm going to trust you mean it, and that you're ready for what comes next." "I am," Monique said. He nodded once. "Then I vote yes." Julia Lin followed. "Yes." Another hand, then another. One by one, each member cast their vote. By the time the last virtual attendee confirmed, it was unanimous. 12 out of 12. Vidian was pulling out. There was no applause, no backslaps. The silence that followed wasn't hesitation. It was weight, the kind of decision that shifts the foundation of a company. As the boardroom began to empty, Leandra caught Monique by the door. "You sure about this?" she asked. Monique nodded. "Dead sure." Leandra gave a half smile. "You just turned a quiet insult into a corporate earthquake." Monique looked over her shoulder. Her voice was soft. "Good. But the world hadn't heard the story yet. Not the public, not the media, not the industry. And once they did, everything would change. It didn't take long. 36 hours. That's all it took for the news to catch fire. Vidian issued a formal release. Vidian Systems terminates strategic partnership with Northern Air Parent Company following the CEO's detainment by airport security. By noon, Forbes, TechCrunch, and CNBC had all picked it up. The phrasing was careful, but the message was clear. And then the internal memo leaked, the one Monique had written herself. "I wasn't pulled aside because of a threat. I was pulled because of a perception that someone like me couldn't possibly be a CEO. If my existence makes people uncomfortable, they can stay uncomfortable." That sentence struck like lightning. Pulled while black began trending. Northern Air's stock dropped 6% in a single day. Their comms team scrambled, pushing out a second apology that read more like a legal disclaimer. "We regret the misunderstanding and deeply value diversity." Monique didn't respond. She didn't need to. The world had already made up its mind. Cable news lit up with discussions on airport profiling. Morning shows ran panel debates. Online, social feeds became battlegrounds. Some hailed her decision as brave, others dismissed it as overblown or woke nonsense. And yet, most of the loudest critics couldn't even name what Vidian did. But inside the tech world, something shifted. Workers began sharing their own stories. Some anonymous, some public, all of them real. Random screening 3 times in one connection. TSA asked my black coworker for ID but waved me through. First class makes people nervous when you don't look like what they expect. It wasn't just a news story anymore. It was a mirror. At Vidian, the legal team worked overtime to unwind the deal. Finance braced for tough calls. But something unexpected happened. The investors didn't panic. They leaned in. One major stakeholder told the Wall Street Journal. The leadership Monique Ellison showed, walking away from $4 billion to stand on principle. That's exactly why we invest in her company. And through all of it, Monique stayed silent. No interviews, no tweets, no press tours. She went back to work. One afternoon, near the coffee machine, a quiet voice called out, "Dr. Ellison?" She turned. A junior engineer from the UX team, nervous, maybe 23, stood with her hands clasped. I saw everything, the press, what you did. I just wanted to say, thank you." Monique gave a tired but honest smile. "You're welcome." The engineer hesitated, then said, "I've never seen someone in your position actually do something about it." And Monique nodded, because that, right there, was the reason she had. Monique nodded slowly, her tone quiet but firm. That's the difference between having a seat at the table and owning the damn table. Celia blinked, smiled, and walked off. Monique poured herself a black coffee. No sugar, no cream, just the way she liked it. She took a slow sip and turned to the tall windows, watching the Arizona evening stretch across the skyline. The storm hadn't passed, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was merely weathering it. She had started it. Still, there was one truth she hadn't told. And that moment was coming, fast. The interview wasn't planned. No prep, no PR brief, no makeup team. A local Phoenix reporter, Samira Hall, had reached out for days. Emails, voicemails, even a handwritten letter dropped off at Vidian HQ. Samira wasn't after a soundbite. She wanted a conversation. So Monique said yes. They met on the rooftop lounge at Vidian just before sunset. Golden light poured through glass panels. No lights, no scripts, just 2 chairs and 1 camera. Samira leaned in, calm but direct. "Why now? Why speak publicly?" Monique paused. "Because if I didn't, nothing would have changed." She looked out toward the skyline, then back to Samira. "I've spent 20 years in rooms where I was the only one who looked like me, where people confused my name with someone else's. And still, I followed the rules. I built something real, but none of that mattered when I got pulled off a flight for looking suspicious." Samira nodded gently. Some say this could have been handled quietly. A small curve touched Monique's lips, not quite a smile. Of course they do. Quiet is comfortable. Quiet doesn't scare investors. Quiet keeps the doors closed and the money moving. She paused. "But people who look like me, we don't get the luxury of quiet." "Do you think the airline will change anything?" Samira asked. Monique shrugged. Maybe they'll hire consultants, rewrite policies, put out a campaign, but that's not the point." "Then what is the point?" Monique looked straight into the lens, her voice low but certain. "The point is, I don't have to explain myself to deserve dignity. I don't have to be famous or rich or educated to be respected at the gate. I just have to be a person. And that should have been enough." Silence. Samira let it breathe. Then softly, "Do you regret walking away from the deal?" Monique leaned back in her chair. "I regret missing that flight. I regret not being in that room when the ink dried. But the deal?" She shook her head. "Number, I built this company to create smart tech, not to excuse bad behavior. $4 billion can't buy back your dignity." Samira flipped through her notes. One last question. "What would you say to the woman watching this right now, afraid to speak up, afraid to lose what she's worked for?" Monique didn't hesitate. "I'd tell her, you were never meant to shrink so others could feel big. If the table shakes when you speak, Maybe it wasn't built for you in the first place. The camera clicked off. The producer gave a thumbs up. Samira stood, shook Monique's hand. "No one's going to forget this," she said. "I hope not," Monique replied. She stepped out into the Arizona night. The air was still, but her steps were lighter than they'd been in weeks. Later that night, she sat alone in her home office, the same desk where she had typed that first statement. The headlines had slowed. The noise had faded. The deals were gone. The shares had recovered. But something deeper had shifted. Inside her, inside Vidian, maybe even beyond. She opened her laptop again. This time it wasn't a memo, not a press release, not a statement for the board. This was for the people who had been mistaken for less, for those who had been watched for walking too confidently, for the ones who had been asked, "Can I help you?" in places they absolutely belonged. She typed, then clicked publish on Vidian's official site. It read, "You don't need a billion-dollar contract to protect your dignity. You don't need a boardroom title to demand better. You don't need permission to be respected. If the rules change when you show up, maybe the rules were wrong. Stand firm anyway. Speak, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's risky. Especially then. No hashtags, no logo, just truth." Monique closed the laptop and sat for a moment in silence. Not because the fight was over, but because she hadn't stayed silent. Because she hadn't let someone else's fear shrink her worth. Because somewhere, someone would read those words and realize they weren't alone. She stood, walked to the window, looked out over the Scottsdale skyline. The world kept moving, and so would she. If you've ever been judged before you were heard, if you've ever been asked to stay quiet to keep the peace, let Monique's story remind you. Peace built on silence isn't peace. It's control. So don't shrink. Don't wait. Tell your story. Stand your ground. And if you ever get pulled off your path, walk back on it stronger.